When I saw my daughter on the subway with my grandson, I asked, "Why aren't you using the car I gave you?" She whispered, "My husband and his mom took it and used my family to threaten me." I just said, "Don't worry." Then I made just one call. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never expected to see my daughter on the subway at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Harper was supposed to be driving the Honda Accord I'd bought her just 8 months ago, a beautiful blue 2022 model that cost me $28,000. Money I'd gladly spent because I wanted my daughter to be safe, to have reliable transportation for herself and my 6-year-old grandson, Danny. But there she was, squeezed between a businessman reading his phone and an elderly woman with too many shopping bags, holding Danny's small hand tightly as the train swayed through another tunnel. Her hair, once bright and full of life, hung limply around her face. She looked thinner than I remembered, her cheekbones more pronounced, her eyes carrying a weight I hadn't seen since her mother died when she was 12. Danny spotted me first. His face lit up with the pure joy only a 6-year-old can manage, and he started waving frantically. "Grandpa, Grandpa!" Harper's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear before it melted into a forced smile. She whispered something urgent to Danny, who immediately stopped waving and looked confused. I made my way through the crowded car, my heart already sinking. Something was wrong, very wrong. "Harper, sweetheart," I said, settling into the empty seat across from them. "What are you doing here? Where's your car?" The smile faltered for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something desperate in her eyes before she reconstructed her expression. "Oh, Dad, hi. We were just running some errands downtown. You know how parking is." It was a lie. I could hear it in the way her voice pitched higher, see it in the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Danny shifted restlessly beside her, his small legs swinging back and forth. He opened his mouth to say something, but Harper's grip on his hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Parking," I repeated slowly. "Harper, you live in Brookline. There's plenty of parking near the subway station. Why didn't you drive to the station and take the train from there?" She was quiet for so long that the train stopped at 2 more stations. People got on and off around us, the usual symphony of city sounds, squeaking brakes, automated announcements, conversations in a dozen languages, filling the space where her answer should have been. Finally, when we were alone except for Danny and an old man dozing in the corner, she leaned forward and spoke in a voice so low I had to strain to hear it. "They took it." "Who took it?" But even as I asked, I was afraid I already knew the answer. "Roger and his mother." Her voice cracked on the names. They said I didn't need it anymore. That I should be grateful they let me keep the apartment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Let her keep the apartment? The apartment where she lived with her husband and son. "Harper, that car is in your name. Legally, they can't just take it." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Legal doesn't matter when." She glanced at Danny, who was thankfully distracted by something outside the window. "When they have other ways of making you cooperate." My blood pressure spiked. I'd been a lawyer for 38 years before retiring 3 years ago. I knew manipulation when I saw it, knew the signs of financial abuse, emotional control. But this was my daughter. My bright, independent daughter who'd graduated summa cum laude from Boston University, who'd once told me she'd never let anyone control her the way her mother had been controlled by her own family. "What kind of ways, Harper?" She was quiet again, her fingers nervously smoothing Danny's hair. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were swimming with tears she was fighting desperately not to shed. Roger knows things about our family, about you, things Diane found out somehow. They said if I don't cooperate, if I cause any trouble, they'll make sure I lose Danny, permanently." Her voice dropped even lower. "They said they'd use our family's reputation against me in court, make it look like I'm an unfit mother." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. "What things about our family?" But Harper shook her head quickly. "I can't. Not here." Not with Danny. She glanced around nervously as if someone might be listening. Dad, they monitor my phone. They check my bank accounts. I haven't been able to call you or see you without permission in over 2 years. 2 years. 2 years since our regular Sunday dinners had mysteriously stopped. 2 years since she'd stopped returning my calls promptly, always texting back with excuses about being busy or tired. I'd thought she was just adjusting to motherhood, to married life. I'd given her space when I should have been paying attention. Harper, listen to me. I kept my voice calm, controlled, the way I'd learned to do in court when everything was falling apart. This is going to stop. Today. She shook her head, frantically. No, Dad, you don't understand. They're too smart. They've thought of everything. Roger's mother, she's done this before. She knows exactly how to make it look like I'm the problem. Done what before? But the train was slowing down, and I could see Harper tensing up. She pulled out an old flip phone, not the iPhone I knew she'd had, and checked the time. I have to go, she said, gathering Danny's small backpack. I was only supposed to be gone for an hour. If I'm late, they'll want to know why. Harper, wait. But she was already standing, Danny's hand in hers. As they moved toward the doors, she turned back to me one last time. The expression on her face was one I'd seen in my courtroom too many times, the look of someone who'd given up hope, who'd accepted that their situation was permanent. Don't worry about me, Dad, she whispered. I'm handling it. The doors slid shut between us, and I watched through the window as she walked away, her shoulders hunched as if she were carrying an invisible weight. Danny looked back once, waving at me through the glass before his mother pulled him out of sight. I sat in that empty subway car for 3 more stops, my mind racing. My daughter was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that required more than a father's love and good intentions to fix. But Harper was wrong about one thing. I wasn't going to worry about her. Worrying was passive, helpless. What I was going to do was much more active. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. A number I'd hoped I'd never have to use, but had kept just in case. It rang twice before a familiar, gruff voice answered. Morrison Investigations. Detective Morrison, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. It's Michael Brennan. I need your help. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Michael, it's been, 5 years since the Patterson case? Something like that. Listen, Tom, this is personal. It's about my daughter. What kind of personal? I looked out the subway window at the city rushing by, thinking about Harper's hollow eyes, her forced smile, the way she'd flinched when I asked about the car. The kind where someone is going to pay. The call with Detective Morrison had been brief but productive. He'd agreed to meet me the next morning, but I couldn't wait that long to start putting pieces together. I spent that evening in my study, surrounded by the legal pads and case files that had been my tools for nearly 4 decades, trying to reconstruct when everything had gone wrong. The truth was, I'd seen the signs. I'd just chosen to ignore them. It started small, the way these things always do. 3 years ago, when Danny was 3, Harper began canceling our Sunday dinners. Just occasionally at first. Roger had work commitments, Danny wasn't feeling well, they'd been invited to his mother's house instead. Reasonable excuses, the kind any busy family might have. But then the cancellations became more frequent and the excuses became more elaborate. Roger had been promoted and needed to work weekends. Diane, his mother, had health problems and needed Harper's help. Danny was having trouble adjusting to preschool and needed quiet weekends at home. I should have pushed harder, should have insisted on seeing my daughter and grandson. But I'd been trying to be respectful, trying to give them space to build their own family traditions. After all, Harper was 32 years old, or be a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. The first real warning sign came 18 months ago, during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. Harper had called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice tight with stress. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Did you ever tell Roger that you thought he wasn't good enough for me? The question had caught me completely off guard. What? No, Harper. Why would you think that? He says you told him at our wedding that you were worried about my future with him, that you thought I was settling. I'd been quiet for a long moment, searching my memory. The wedding had been 7 years ago, a small ceremony at the Brookline Country Club. I'd been nothing but polite to Roger, had even made an effort to include him in conversations about baseball and his job at the dealership. Harper, I never said anything like that to Roger, ever. But he was so specific about it. He said you pulled him aside during the reception and, honey, that never happened. I barely spoke to Roger one-on-one that entire day. There had been a long silence, and I could almost hear her processing this information. When she finally spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. Oh. Well, maybe I misunderstood what he told me. But I knew she hadn't misunderstood. Someone was lying, and it wasn't my daughter. That conversation had haunted me for weeks. I'd started paying closer attention during our occasional visits, watching the dynamics between Harper and Roger. What I saw made my skin crawl. The way Roger would interrupt Harper mid-sentence, then apologize with a laugh, saying she got confused sometimes. The way he'd speak for her when I asked her direct questions. The way Harper would glance at him before answering, as if seeking permission. Most unsettling was the way he'd positioned himself as the reasonable one, the patient husband dealing with a wife who was still adjusting to married life, and a little overwhelmed by motherhood. He painted Harper as fragile, emotional, prone to misremembering things, and I'd bought it. God help me. There were moments when I'd actually believed him. The financial control had been even more subtle. It started with Roger suggesting that Harper didn't need her own credit card since they shared accounts. We're married, he'd said with that boyish smile of his. What's mine is hers, what's hers is mine. Then he'd convinced her to quit her job as a graphic designer. Danny needs his mother, Diane had said during one of their visits to my house. Daycare is so damaging to children. Harper's being selfish, putting her career before her son's well-being. Harper had been torn. She'd loved her job, had built a small but successful freelance business before Danny was born. But between Roger's subtle pressure and Diane's guilt trips, she'd gradually given it up. It's temporary, Harper had told me when she announced her decision, just until Danny starts school. But temporary had stretched into 3 years, and I'd watched my confident, independent daughter slowly transform into someone I barely recognized. Someone who apologized for her opinions, who second-guessed herself constantly, who seemed to shrink a little more each time I saw her. The phone rang, startling me out of my memories. I glanced at the clock, 11:30 at night. Who would be calling so late? The caller ID showed Harper's name, but when I answered, it was Roger's voice I heard. Michael. Sorry to call so late, but I wanted to catch you before you went to bed. Roger. I kept my voice neutral. What can I do for you? Well, Harper mentioned she ran into you on the subway today. She's a little worried that you might have gotten the wrong impression about our situation. What kind of impression? Roger laughed, that same easy laugh that had once charmed me but now set my teeth on edge. You know how Harper can be. She gets a little dramatic sometimes. I think she might have made it sound like we took her car away from her when really we're just having it serviced. Serviced? Yeah, the transmission was making some noise. My buddy owns a shop in Quincy. He's giving us a good deal on the repairs. Should have it back to her in a few days. I leaned back in my chair, studying the ceiling. Roger was good. Very good. The lie was plausible, delivered with just the right amount of casual confidence. If I hadn't seen the fear in Harper's eyes that afternoon, I might have believed him. That's good of your friend, I said. What's the name of the shop? I'd like to recommend him to my neighbors if he does good work. There was the briefest pause. Oh, you know, I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head. Tony's something or other. I'll ask Harper to get you the details. Don't worry about it. I'll ask Harper myself when I talk to her. Another pause, longer this time. Actually, Michael, that's kind of why I'm calling. Harper's been feeling a little overwhelmed lately. The doctor thinks she might be dealing with some postpartum depression, even though Danny's 6 now. You know how these things can linger. Postpartum depression. 6 years later. The audacity of it took my breath away. I see. The thing is, the doctor recommended that Harper limit stressful situations for a while, family visits, phone calls, that kind of thing, just until she gets back on her feet. Are you telling me I can't see my daughter? Of course not. Roger's voice carried just the right note of wounded innocence. I would never presume to interfere with your relationship with Harper. I'm just asking that you maybe give her some space right now, for her own good. For her own good? The manipulation was so naked, so blatant that I almost laughed out loud. I appreciate your concern for Harper's well-being, I said carefully, but I think I know my daughter well enough to judge what's best for her. Of course you do, Roger said quickly. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that, well, Diane has some experience with these kinds of mental health issues. She's been such a help to Harper, really guiding her through this difficult time. Diane. Roger's mother. The woman who'd never liked Harper from the moment they'd met. The woman who'd made snide comments about Harper's weight during her pregnancy, who'd criticized her parenting at every opportunity, who'd somehow convinced Harper that she needed guidance from someone who clearly resented her existence. I'm sure Diane means well, I said. She does. We all do. We just want what's best for Harper and Danny. So do I. There was a long silence. When Roger spoke again, his voice had lost some of its warmth. Of course. Well, I should let you get some sleep. Thanks for understanding about the car situation. I'll make sure Harper explains everything when she's feeling more like herself. The line went dead. I sat in my study for a long time after that, staring at the phone and thinking about patterns, about the way predators isolated their prey, cut them off from support systems, made them dependent. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Harper 18 months ago, about Roger's claim that I'd insulted him at their wedding, about how Harper's voice had changed when I'd denied it, how she'd sounded like someone who was just beginning to realize she'd been lied to. Most of all, I thought about the fear in her eyes on the subway, and the way she'd looked around nervously as if someone might be watching. Someone was watching, someone was always watching, but two could play that game. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts again, this time looking for a different number, one I hadn't called in years but knew would still be active. It rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. Marcus Webb. Marcus, it's Michael Brennan. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need a favor. Marcus was a private investigator I'd worked with on several difficult divorce cases. Discreet, thorough, and completely without scruples when it came to protecting his clients' interests. Michael, Jesus, what time is it? Late. Listen, I need you to look into someone for me. Roger Castellano, mid-30s, works at a car dealership in Newton. I want to know everything, his financial history, employment record, previous relationships, everything. There was a pause as Marcus woke up fully. This personal or professional? Personal. And Marcus, I need it fast. How fast? I thought about Harper's hollow eyes, about the fear in her voice when she told me about the threats. Yesterday. Detective Morrison looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago, when we'd worked together on the Patterson custody case. Still built like a linebacker, still wearing the same style of rumpled brown jacket, still carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen every kind of human ugliness and lived to tell about it. We met at Murphy's Diner on Commonwealth Avenue, a place where the coffee was strong and the booths were deep enough to have private conversations. I'd arrived 10 minutes early, but Morrison was already there, nursing a cup of black coffee and reading through a manila folder that was thicker than I'd expected. You work fast, I said, sliding into the booth across from him. When Michael Brennan calls in a favor, I pay attention. He closed the folder and looked at me with those sharp gray eyes that had intimidated countless witnesses over the years. Tell me about your daughter. I told him everything, about the subway encounter, about Harper's fear, about the phone call from Roger. Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a small pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How much do you know about your son-in-law's previous relationships? Not much. Harper mentioned he'd had a serious girlfriend before her, but they broke up because she moved away for work. Why? Morrison opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young woman with dark hair and nervous eyes sitting in what looked like a police station. This is Amanda Walsh. She dated Roger for 3 years. From 2011 to 2014, she filed a restraining order against him in January of 2015. My blood chilled. What happened? According to the police report, Roger had been controlling her finances, monitoring her communications, and threatening to harm himself if she left him. Sound familiar? It sounded very familiar. I stared at the photograph, seeing echoes of Harper's hollow expression in this stranger's face. There's more, Morrison continued, pulling out another file. Jessica Martinez dated Roger from 2015 to 2017. No restraining order, but she did file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau about Roger's mother. Diane, what kind of complaint? Diane apparently convinced Jessica to invest $15,000 in a business venture that never materialized. When Jessica asked for her money back, Diane claimed there had been a misunderstanding about the terms. Morrison laid out more photographs, more documents. 3 women in total, all between the ages of 25 and 35 when they'd met Roger. All had ended up isolated from their families, financially dependent, and emotionally shattered. The pattern is always the same, Morrison explained. Roger targets women who are independent but emotionally vulnerable. Women who've lost a parent, who've moved away from their support systems, who are looking for stability. He's charming at first, incredibly romantic. Makes them feel like they're the center of his world. I thought about Harper at 25, still grieving her, mother's death, working long hours to build her freelance business. The perfect target. Then what happens? The isolation starts slowly. He finds reasons why their friends are bad influences, why their families don't understand their relationship. He encourages them to quit their jobs, to become financially dependent on him. By the time they realize what's happening, they're trapped. Morrison pulled out a legal document. This is the really interesting part. All 3 of these women had assets when they met Roger. Savings accounts, cars, inheritances. By the time they broke up with him, they had nothing. He stole from them? Legally, no. They signed documents giving him access to their accounts, put his name on their car titles, agreed to investments that benefited him. But they all claim they were coerced, that he used emotional manipulation and threats to get them to cooperate. I felt sick. What kind of threats? Suicide threats were common. He'd threaten to kill himself if they left him, if they didn't do what he wanted. Amanda Walsh told police that Roger once stood on the edge of a highway overpass, threatening to jump unless she agreed to take out a loan to pay off his gambling debts. And they all believed him? Morrison's expression was grim. Michael, you've been practicing law long enough to know how manipulation works. These women weren't stupid or weak. They were systematically broken down over a period of years. Roger is very, very good at what he does. What about his mother? Diane's role in all this? That's where it gets really ugly. Diane provides the legitimacy, the motherly approval that makes the whole thing seem normal. She's the one who convinces these women that Roger's behavior is acceptable, that they're overreacting to his protective instincts. She also handles the financial scams, the fake business investments, the emergency loans that never get repaid. Morrison pulled out another document. This is Diane's credit report. She's been involved in at least 6 questionable financial transactions over the past 10 years, always involving young women who were dating her son. I stared at the papers spread across the diner table, feeling a cold rage building in my chest. This wasn't just about Roger being a bad husband. This was about 2 people who had turned emotional abuse into a business model. Where are these women now? Amanda Walsh moved back to California to live with her sister, lost her house, her car, everything. Jessica Martinez is in therapy trying to rebuild her life. The 3rd woman, Kelly Chen, took out a restraining order against both Roger and Diane last year. Last year, while Roger was married to Harper? Apparently, Roger had been contacting Kelly on social media, telling her he'd made a mistake, that he wanted to work things out. When she refused to see him, Diane started showing up at her workplace, claiming Kelly owed them money from their previous relationship. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture so ugly I could barely process it. Roger hadn't just been unfaithful to Harper, he'd been running a parallel scheme, trying to rekindle relationships with his previous victims. Does Harper know about any of this? Morrison shook his head. I doubt it. Roger and his mother are experts at compartmentalization. They keep their victims isolated from each other, make each one believe she's special, that the problems in the relationship are her fault. I thought about Harper's voice on the subway, the way she'd said Roger and Diane had threatened to use our family's reputation against her. What kind of leverage do they have over Harper specifically? Morrison consulted his notes. I'm still working on that, but based on the pattern, they've probably convinced her that she's an unfit mother in some way, that she's mentally unstable or financially irresponsible. They create a narrative where the victim is always at fault, always in need of their guidance and control. How do we stop them? That's the tricky part. Everything Roger and Diane do is technically legal. The financial coercion happens gradually with signed documents. The emotional abuse is hard to prove, and they're smart enough to avoid anything that would constitute criminal behavior. Morrison leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. But there's one thing working in our favor. Roger's getting sloppy. The fact that he tried to restart things with Kelly Chen while married to Harper shows he's overconfident, taking bigger risks. What does that mean for Harper? It means we set a trap. We give Roger enough rope to hang himself, and we make sure Harper is protected when he does. I felt a spark of hope for the first time since seeing Harper on the subway. What kind of trap? Morrison smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Roger thinks he's the smartest person in the room. He's used to dealing with isolated, vulnerable women who have no one to turn to for help. But Harper has something his other victims didn't have. What's that? She has a father who's not going to let this slide, and she has a father who knows exactly how to destroy someone using the legal system. Morrison gathered up his files and slid them across the table to me. Take these home, study them. Learn everything you can about Roger and Diane's methods, because we're going to use their own tactics against them. As we stood to leave, Morrison grabbed my arm. Michael, there's one more thing you need to know. According to my sources, Roger has been telling people that Harper is mentally unstable, that she's been having episodes. He's building a case for custody of your grandson. The rage I'd been keeping contained finally boiled over my dead body. That's the spirit, Morrison said grimly. Because if we don't stop this now, Roger is going to take everything from Harper, her son, her freedom, her sanity, and based on his track record, he'll probably succeed. I walked out of that diner with a burning determination I hadn't felt since my prosecuting days. Roger and Diane had picked the wrong family to target. They'd mistaken Harper's kindness for weakness, her trust for stupidity. They were about to learn the difference between a victim with no resources and a victim whose father had spent 4 decades learning how to destroy people professionally. The game was about to change, and this time, I was going to be the one making the rules. I had work to do, phone calls to make, a case to build, and Roger Castellano was about to discover that some fathers don't just get mad, they get methodical. The plan Morrison and I developed was elegant in its simplicity. Roger's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He believed he was smarter than everyone around him, more sophisticated than the authorities, more manipulative than his victims' families. We were going to use that arrogance to destroy him. It started with a phone call. I dialed Roger's number at exactly 8:15 on a Friday morning, knowing he'd be at the dealership, probably between customers. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say, but I needed to sound spontaneous, like a concerned father reaching out in good faith. Roger, it's Michael. Do you have a minute to talk? Michael, of course. Is everything okay? The false warmth in his voice made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to match his tone. Everything's fine. I've just been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I wanted to apologize if I seemed resistant to your suggestions about Harper. There was a pause. I could almost hear Roger recalibrating, trying to figure out what angle I was playing. No need to apologize, Michael. I know you love Harper. We all want what's best for her. That's exactly why I'm calling. I've been doing some research about postpartum depression, and I think you might be right about Harper needing professional help. I'd like to contribute to her treatment, maybe help with the medical bills. The silence stretched longer this time. When Roger finally spoke, I could hear the excitement he was trying to hide. That's incredibly generous, Michael. I know Harper would be so grateful for your support. Of course. Family is family, but I want to make sure any money I contribute is used properly, you understand? Absolutely. What did you have in mind? This was the crucial moment. Morrison and I had spent hours crafting this approach, knowing that Roger's greed would override his caution. Well, I was thinking about setting up some kind of trust or medical fund, something that would ensure the money goes directly to Harper's care with proper oversight. I'd probably need to involve my financial advisor, maybe have him meet with you and Harper to discuss the details. That sounds perfect, Roger said quickly. When were you thinking? How about this weekend, Saturday afternoon? I could have my advisor come to your place. We could all sit down together and work out the arrangements. Actually, Roger's voice took on that smooth, controlling tone I'd learned to recognize. It might be better if we met at my mother's house. Harper's more comfortable there, and Diane has experience with these kinds of financial arrangements. Of course she does, I thought. Out loud I said, whatever makes Harper most comfortable. Should I bring any specific documentation? Just your financial information, bank statements, investment accounts, that sort of thing. Diane will need to see the full picture to set up the trust properly. There it was. Roger had just admitted that his mother would be handling my money, reviewing my private financial information, and setting up a trust that I'd never actually agreed to create. Morrison had been right. Roger was getting sloppy, so confident in his ability to manipulate people that he wasn't even bothering to be subtle anymore. I'll bring everything, I said. What's the address? Roger gave me Diane's address in Newton, a nice suburban neighborhood where the houses were expensive enough to look respectable, but not so expensive as to attract unwanted attention. We agreed on 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Oh, and Michael? Roger's voice carried a note of false intimacy. It might be better if we kept this between us for now. Harper's been so stressed lately, and I don't want to get her hopes up until everything is finalized. Of course, I understand completely. The moment I hung up, I called Morrison. He took the bait? Hook, line, and sinker. Saturday afternoon at Diane's house. He wants me to bring my financial information so they can set up a trust for Harper's medical care. Morrison chuckled. Beautiful. They're moving faster than I expected. Did he mention keeping it secret from Harper? Naturally. He doesn't want to get her hopes up. Perfect. That gives us everything we need. He's admitting that he's making financial arrangements for Harper without her knowledge or consent, and that his mother is involved in handling other people's money. Morrison had already arranged for the technical aspects of our trap. My financial advisor would actually be Marcus Webb, the private investigator I'd worked with before, wearing a wire and carrying recording equipment, sophisticated enough to capture every word of the conversation. The plan was simple. Get Roger and Diane to incriminate themselves by revealing their true intentions about the money, about Harper's supposed mental health issues, and about their long-term plans for controlling her life. Once we had them on tape admitting their schemes, we'd have enough evidence to protect Harper legally and expose their manipulation to the authorities. Saturday morning, I met with Marcus at his office in downtown Boston. He was a thin, nervous-looking man who could pass for an accountant or insurance agent, exactly the kind of a person Roger would underestimate. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Marcus asked as he fitted me with a small recording device. "If these people are as dangerous as Morrison says, this could get ugly." "They've been destroying my daughter's life for 7 years," I said flatly. I'm not backing down now. Marcus handed me a briefcase filled with fake financial documents. Bank statements showing a larger balance than I actually had, investment portfolios that looked impressive but were completely fabricated, insurance policies and retirement accounts that painted the picture of a wealthy man with more money than sense. Remember, Marcus said, let them do most of the talking. Ask questions that make them explain their plans in detail. The more specific they get about how they're going to handle your money, the more trouble they'll be in later. At exactly 2 o'clock, Marcus and I rang the doorbell of Diane's house. It was a colonial-style home with perfectly manicured landscaping and expensive cars in the driveway, the kind of place that screamed respectable middle-class prosperity. Diane answered the door herself. She was a woman in her late 50s, carefully preserved with salon-perfect hair and clothes that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Her smile was warm and welcoming, but her eyes were calculating, already sizing me up as a potential source of income. "Michael, how wonderful to finally meet you properly. Roger has told me so much about you." She led us into a living room that looked like something out of a magazine. All cream-colored furniture and expensive artwork, with not a single personal touch or sign that real people actually lived there. Roger was waiting for us, dressed in his best suit and wearing that boyish smile that had once charmed me. "Dad?" He stood up and shook my hand with both of his, a gesture that was probably meant to seem sincere but felt manipulative. "And this must be your financial advisor." Marcus introduced himself with exactly the right mixture of professional competence and nervous deference. Within minutes, Diane had positioned herself as the expert in the room, the wise older woman who would guide us through the complex process of setting up Harper's medical trust. "Now," Diane said, settling into her chair with a legal pad and expensive pen, "let's talk about Harper's needs. Roger has explained to me about her condition, and I have to say I'm not surprised. I saw the signs early in their marriage, but Harper was always so resistant to getting help." "What kind of signs?" Marcus asked innocently. "Oh, the usual things. Mood swings, irrational behavior, difficulty managing money. She's always been impulsive, you know. That's why it's so important that any financial support be properly structured and supervised." Roger nodded gravely. "We've tried to help her manage her expenses, but she gets defensive whenever we offer guidance. That's part of the illness, unfortunately." I forced myself to stay calm, to play the role of the concerned father who was just beginning to understand his daughter's problems. "I had no idea it was so serious," I said. "What kind of treatment are we looking at?" "Well," Diane said, consulting her notes, "there's the psychiatric evaluation, of course. That alone will cost about $5,000. Then there's the ongoing therapy, probably 2 to 3 sessions per week at $150 each. And if she needs medication—" She let the sentence trail off meaningfully. Marcus leaned forward with his pen poised over his notepad. "And how would you recommend structuring the trust to cover these expenses?" This was where Diane's true nature began to show. Her eyes lit up as she launched into a detailed explanation of how the money would be managed. By her, of course, since she had experience with these matters. Harper wouldn't have direct access to the funds, which would prevent her from misusing the money during her emotional episodes. "You have to understand," Roger interjected, "Harper can't be trusted to make rational decisions about her own care right now. She's convinced that there's nothing wrong with her, that we're the ones causing her problems. It's textbook delusional behavior." "How long has she been experiencing these delusions?" Marcus asked. Roger and Diane exchanged glances. "It's been getting worse over the past 2 years," Diane said. "She's become increasingly paranoid, claiming that Roger is monitoring her phone calls and controlling her money. She even accused him of hiding her car keys to prevent her from leaving the house." "Of course none of that is true," Roger added quickly. "We're just trying to keep her safe. She's been having these episodes where she forgets conversations we've had, forgets agreements she's made. The doctor thinks it might be early-onset dementia complicated by the depression." I felt a white-hot rage building in my chest, but I kept my voice level. This sounds more serious than I realized. What's the long-term prognosis? That's the thing, Diane said, leaning forward conspiratorially. With proper treatment and supervision, Harper could live a relatively normal life. But she needs structure, guidance. She needs people who can make decisions for her when she's not capable of making them herself. People like you, Marcus said. Exactly. Roger and I have already been providing that kind of support, but it's been a strain on our finances. Roger's been using his own money to pay for Harper's care, to keep her from making impulsive purchases or poor decisions. What kind of impulsive purchases? I asked. Oh, you know how women can be with shopping, Diane said with a laugh that made my skin crawl. Clothes, jewelry, expensive treats for Danny. She spent $3,000 on toys for him last Christmas, money they didn't have. Roger had to take her credit cards away to prevent her from putting the family deeper into debt. Roger nodded sadly. It's heartbreaking, really. She used to be so responsible, so independent, but this illness has changed her completely. They continued talking for another 30 minutes, each lie building on the previous one, each fabrication more elaborate than the last. They painted a picture of Harper as a delusional, irresponsible woman who needed constant supervision and medical intervention. They positioned themselves as her devoted caregivers, sacrificing their own comfort for her well-being, and through it all, they made it clear that any money I contributed would be under their complete control, with no oversight or accountability. By the time Marcus and I left Diane's house, we had recorded over an hour of conversation that thoroughly documented Roger and Diane's fraudulent intentions, their systematic lies about Harper's mental health, and their plans to steal money under the guise of medical care. Jesus, Marcus said as we drove away. I've heard a lot of scams in my time, but those two are professionals. They had answers for everything, explanations for every lie. Did we get enough? More than enough. Between what they said today and the evidence Morrison gathered about their previous victims, you've got a solid case for fraud, financial elder abuse, and conspiracy. Any prosecutor in the state would love to take this to trial. But I wasn't thinking about prosecutors or trials. I was thinking about Harper, sitting alone in that apartment, believing she was mentally ill, believing she deserved the treatment she was receiving. I was thinking about my grandson, growing up in a house where his mother was systematically destroyed every single day. And I was thinking about what I was going to do next. Because recording Roger and Diane was just the first step. Now came the part where I destroyed them. The confrontation came sooner than I'd expected. I'd planned to wait another week before making my move, to gather even more evidence and ensure that Harper was completely protected before exposing Roger and Diane's scheme. But sometimes life forces your hand, and Sunday morning at 9:30, my phone rang with Harper's number on the caller ID. This time, it was actually Harper calling. "Dad?" Her voice was shaking, barely above a whisper. "Can you come get me, please?" My blood turned to ice. "Harper, what's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm at the grocery store on Beacon Street. Roger thinks I'm shopping, but I found something. Dad, I found recordings." "What kind of recordings?" "Recordings of our conversations, private conversations I had with you, with Danny's teachers, with my old boss from the design firm. He's been recording everything for years." I was already reaching for my car keys. "Stay where you are. Don't go home. I'm coming to get you right now." "I can't stay long. If I'm gone too much longer, he'll come looking for me." "But Dad, there's more. Found a notebook where he's been documenting everything I do, everything I say. He's building some kind of case against me." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Roger hadn't just been controlling Harper's present. He'd been systematically documenting evidence to destroy her future. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment of vulnerability had been cataloged and recorded for future use. "Harper, listen to me very carefully. I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" "Yes." "I'm going to tell you some things that are going to be hard to hear, but I need you to know the truth. Roger and his mother have been running a scam. You're not mentally ill, you're not irresponsible, and you're not a bad mother. You've been deliberately manipulated and gaslighted for years." There was a long silence. When Harper spoke again, her voice was different, stronger, but with an undercurrent of rage. I hadn't heard from her since she was a teenager. I know. I've known something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. Every time I tried to think clearly about what was happening, Roger would show me evidence of things I'd supposedly said or done, things I couldn't remember. Because they never happened. He's been creating false evidence to make you doubt your own memory and judgment. The recordings I found, some of them are edited. Conversations where my voice says things I never said. Dad, how is that even possible? Modern technology had made it frighteningly easy to manipulate audio recordings, to splice together words and phrases to create entirely fabricated conversations. Roger had been building an elaborate fiction about Harper's mental state, complete with manufactured evidence to support his claims. Harper, I need you to listen very carefully. Roger is more dangerous than you realize. He's done this before to other women, and right now he's planning to take Danny away from you. What? Her voice cracked with terror. He's been building a custody case based on the fake evidence he's collected. The mental health claims, the financial irresponsibility charges, it's all part of a plan to get full custody of Danny and cut you out completely. I could hear her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Dad, I need to go back. If Roger realizes I'm gone, if he finds out I discovered the recordings, no, you're not going back there alone. I have to. Danny's at home with Diane. If I don't come back soon, Harper, I'm calling the police. No. The word came out sharper than I'd expected. Dad, you don't understand. Roger has friends on the police force. He's been planning this for months, maybe years. If the police get involved now before we have proof of what he's been doing, he'll just use it as more evidence that I'm unstable. She was right, and I knew it. Roger had been too smart, too methodical in his approach. A hysterical wife calling the police with claims about hidden recordings. And financial manipulation would fit perfectly with his narrative about Harper's deteriorating mental health. Then what do you want to do? I want to go back and confront him, but I want you to be there when I do it. I want witnesses who can't be discredited or manipulated. It was dangerous. Roger had shown himself capable of elaborate psychological manipulation, but I'd seen enough domestic abuse cases to know that when cornered, manipulators often turned violent. But Harper was right about one thing. We needed to force Roger to show his true nature in front of witnesses who couldn't be dismissed or intimidated. All right. But we do this my way, with protection and backup. I called Morrison immediately. Within an hour, we had a plan. Morrison would position himself outside Roger and Harper's apartment building with recording equipment. I would accompany Harper inside, wearing a wire, while Marcus Webb waited in a car across the street as additional backup. The goal is to get Roger to admit what he's been doing, Morrison explained as we prepared. Harper has the advantage now. She knows about the recordings, but Roger doesn't know that she knows. We want him to incriminate himself. What if he gets violent? Harper asked. That's why your father is going to be there, and why I'm going to be right outside. If things go bad, we'll have plenty of evidence of Roger's true nature. Harper looked pale but determined. Let's do it. The drive to her apartment was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Harper sat beside me, clutching the small recording device she'd taken from Roger's hiding place. A tiny digital recorder that contained hours of manipulated conversations. I keep thinking about all the times he made me feel crazy, she said quietly. All the times I questioned my own memory, my own judgment. He was so good at it, Dad, so convincing. That's what makes him dangerous, but it's also what's going to destroy him. He's so arrogant, so confident in his ability to manipulate people that he doesn't know when to stop. We parked outside the apartment building and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Harper's hands were shaking as she unlocked the door, but her voice was steady when she called out, "Roger, I'm home." He appeared in the doorway to the living room, that familiar boyish smile already in place, but something flickered in his eyes when he saw me behind Harper. "Michael, what a surprise. Harper didn't tell me you were coming by." "I invited him," Harper said, her voice carefully neutral. "We need to talk." Diane emerged from the kitchen, Danny's hand in hers. My grandson looked confused and a little frightened by the sudden tension in the room. "Grandpa?" Danny ran toward me and I scooped him up, holding him tight. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to let this little boy be traumatized by it. "Hey, buddy, why don't you go to your room and play for a little while? The grown-ups need to have a boring conversation." Danny nodded and scampered off down the hallway. Once I heard his bedroom door close, Harper pulled out the small recording device and set it on the coffee table. "I found this," she said simply. The change in Roger's expression was instantaneous. The boyish charm vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. Diane took a step backward, her face going pale. "Harper, sweetheart, what exactly do you think you found?" "Recordings of my private conversations that have been edited to make me sound unstable, irresponsible, delusional." Harper's voice was gaining strength with each word. "Conversations that never actually happened the way they appear on these recordings." Roger looked from Harper to me, his mind clearly racing. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Those recordings were made for your own protection, Harper. You've been having memory issues, saying things and then forgetting you said them. I was just trying to help you remember." "By editing my voice to make me say things I never said?" "I never edited anything." But his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "If you think the recordings have been tampered with, maybe we should have them examined by a professional." It was a good recovery, but Harper was ready for it. "I already did. I took them to a friend who works in audio production. The editing is obvious once you know what to look for: splice marks, background noise inconsistencies, frequency mismatches." Roger's jaw tightened. "Who did you show these to?" "Does it matter?" "Harper, you're sick. You're having paranoid delusions about people trying to harm you. This is exactly the kind of behavior the doctors warned us about." "What doctors?" I interjected. "Harper hasn't seen any doctors for mental health issues." Diane stepped forward, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Michael, you don't understand how serious Harper's condition has become. She's been refusing treatment, refusing to acknowledge that she needs help." "The only thing I need help with," Harper said, her voice rising slightly, "is getting you people out of my life." Roger's mask finally slipped completely. "You ungrateful bitch! After everything I've done for you, everything my mother has done, this is how you repay us?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Harper took a step backward, and I moved to stand beside her. "There it is," I said quietly, "the real Roger." "Shut up, old man, this is none of your business." "My daughter is absolutely my business." Roger turned back to Harper, his voice dropping to something low and menacing. "You want to play games, Harper? Fine. Let's play. You walk out that door, you try to take Danny, and I'll destroy you. I have years of evidence about your mental instability, your drug use, your irresponsible behavior." "What drug use?" Harper demanded. "The prescription medications you've been abusing, the drinking problem you've been hiding, the times you've left Danny alone while you went on shopping binges." "None of that is true, and you know it." Roger pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. "I have photos of you passed out drunk while Danny played unsupervised. I have receipts showing you spending thousands of dollars on unnecessary purchases while I struggled to pay our bills. I have recordings of you threatening to hurt yourself if I didn't give you money for drugs." Every word was a lie. But I could see how devastating this would be in a courtroom, presented to a judge who didn't know Harper, who had no reason to doubt the seemingly comprehensive evidence of her unfitness as a mother. "You made all of that up," Harper said, but her voice was shaking now. "Prove it." Roger's smile was cruel, triumphant. "Go ahead, call the police. Tell them your husband has been systematically documenting your descent into mental illness and substance abuse. See who they believe." That's when Harper surprised everyone, including me. Instead of breaking down, instead of cowering under Roger's threats, she laughed. "You're right," she said. "I can't prove you made those things up, but I don't have to." "What the hell does that mean?" Harper looked at me and I nodded slightly. It was time. "It means," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the recording app, that for the past 10 minutes you've been confessing to fabricating evidence against your wife in front of witnesses. Roger's face went white. You recorded this conversation? Every word, including the part where you called my daughter an ungrateful bitch and threatened to destroy her with fake evidence. Diane made a small, gasping sound. Roger, you said nothing could be traced back to us. Shut up, Mother. But it was too late. The damage was done. Roger had revealed his true nature, admitted to creating false evidence, and threatened to commit perjury in family court, all captured in high-definition audio. Get out, Harper said quietly. Both of you. Get out of my apartment right now. Roger took a step toward her, his hands clenched into fists. You think this is over? You think some stupid recording is going to save you? That's when I stepped between them. Try it, son. I'd love to add assault charges to the fraud and conspiracy charges you're already facing. For a moment, Roger looked like he might actually swing at me. His face was flushed with rage, his breath coming in short gasps. But then he seemed to realize how completely he'd lost control, how thoroughly he'd destroyed his own carefully constructed facade. This isn't over, he said, backing toward the door. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, I said, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A small-time con artist who picked the wrong family to target. Roger and Diane left without another word, but I could hear Roger shouting in the hallway, his voice echoing off the walls as they waited for the elevator. Harper collapsed onto the couch, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Is it really over? She asked. The hard part is, I said, sitting beside her and pulling her into a hug. But there's still work to do. We had the recordings, we had Roger's confession, and we had 7 years of documented abuse to present to the authorities. But most importantly, we had Harper's freedom, and we had the truth. The mask had finally fallen, and Roger Castellano was about to learn what happened when you targeted a family that fought back. 6 months later, I sat in the kitchen of my house in Brookline, watching Harper help Danny with his homework at the same table where I'd once helped her with hers. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating two faces that looked more peaceful than I'd seen them in years. Harper had moved back in with me 3 days after the confrontation with Roger, bringing nothing but a few suitcases and a determination to rebuild her life from scratch. The legal process had been swift but thorough. Detective Morrison's evidence, combined with the recordings we'd made, had given us everything we needed to ensure Roger could never hurt Harper or Danny again. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks ago. Harper received full custody of Danny, with Roger granted only supervised visitation rights that he'd already stopped exercising. The restraining order prevented him from contacting Harper directly or coming within 500 feet of her, Danny, or me. But the legal victories, satisfying as they were, paled in comparison to the transformation I'd witnessed in my daughter. Harper looked up from Danny's math worksheet and caught me staring. What? You're humming, I said. I haven't heard you hum in years. She smiled, a genuine expression of contentment that reached her eyes. I feel like humming. Is that weird? It's wonderful. Danny finished his problem and looked up proudly. Grandpa, look, I got all the multiplication tables right. That's fantastic, buddy. You're getting as smart as your mom. Mom's the smartest, Danny said matter-of-factly. She knows everything. Harper ruffled his hair. Not everything, sweetheart, but I'm learning. She was learning. Over the past 6 months, Harper had slowly rediscovered who she was underneath 7 years of systematic manipulation. It hadn't been easy. There had been days when she'd questioned every decision, wondered if Roger might have been right about some things, struggled with the guilt and shame that are the lasting wounds of psychological abuse. But with therapy, with distance from her tormentors, and with the unconditional support of family who actually loved her, Harper was finding her way back to herself. The phone rang, interrupting our peaceful morning. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my jaw tighten slightly. It's Morrison, I told Harper. She nodded. We'd been expecting this call for weeks, ever since the prosecutor's office had informed us that Roger's case was moving forward. Michael, Morrison's voice was cheerful when I answered. "I've got news, good news. I'm listening." Roger Castellano pled guilty this morning. Fraud, conspiracy, stalking, violation of computer privacy laws, the whole package. He's looking at 2 to 4 years, and he'll be required to pay restitution to all his victims. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. What about Diane? She's cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently she's been running similar scams for over a decade, targeting vulnerable women through her son's relationships. She's providing information about other victims we didn't even know about. Harper had been listening to my side of the conversation, and I could see the relief in her eyes. "It's over?" she asked. "It's over," I confirmed. Morrison continued, "There's more. Roger's been ordered to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment, and the restraining order has been extended for 5 years, renewable if necessary." After I hung up, Harper sat quietly for a few minutes, processing the news. Danny had gone back to his homework, oblivious to the significance of the call. "I thought I'd feel more triumphant," Harper said finally. "But I just feel sad. Sad for the person I used to be, sad for all the time I lost, sad for Danny growing up in that environment." "You can't get those years back," I said gently, "but you can make sure the years going forward are different." "I know, and I am. It's just—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Sometimes I wonder how I let it happen, how I let them convince me I was crazy, that I deserved to be treated that way." It was a question she'd asked many times in therapy, a question that haunted many victims of psychological abuse. The simple answer was that Roger and Diane had been professionals, experts at their craft. But the real answer was more complex. "You let it happen because you're a loving person," I said. "Because you wanted to believe the best about the man you'd married, because you trusted your family to support you. Those aren't weaknesses, Harper. Those are the qualities that make you who you are." "But how do I make sure it never happens again?" "By trusting yourself. By listening to that inner voice that tells you when something isn't right. By remembering that real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself." Harper reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you. For not giving up on me, for fighting for me even when I couldn't fight for myself." "You never stopped fighting," I said. "You just fought quietly in ways Roger couldn't see or understand. You protected Danny, you maintained your sanity, you survived. That took incredible strength." Danny looked up from his homework. "Are we going to stay here forever, Mom?" Harper and I had discussed this question many times over the past few months. She could afford a place of her own now. Her freelance design business was thriving again, and she'd received a substantial settlement as part of the divorce. But neither of us was eager to break up the family unit that had been healing all of us. "Would you like to stay here?" Harper asked Danny. "Yes, Grandpa makes the best pancakes, and he helps me with my science projects, and he doesn't get mad when I'm loud." Harper laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Well, if it's okay with Grandpa, I think we can work something out." "It's more than okay," I said. "This house has been too quiet for too long." That evening, after Danny had gone to bed, Harper and I sat on the front porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood I'd lived in for 30 years. It was the same porch where I'd taught her to ride a bike, where we'd had countless conversations about school and friends and dreams for the future. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," Harper said, "about what she would think of everything that happened." Harper's mother, my wife Sarah, had died when Harper was 12, a sudden heart attack that had left both of us reeling. Sarah had been the emotional center of our family, the one who'd taught Harper to be kind and trusting and open-hearted. "She would be proud of you," I said. "Proud of your strength, proud of the mother you've become, proud of the way you fought your way back." "Do you think she would have seen through Roger from the beginning?" I considered the question carefully. Sarah had been intuitive about people, but she'd also been generous in her judgments, inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt. "I think she would have been suspicious of anyone who tried to change you," I said finally. "Your mother loved you exactly as you were. She wouldn't have understood why anyone would want to make you smaller or quieter or less yourself. Harper wiped away a tear. I wish she could meet Danny. Really meet him, not just as the scared little boy he was, with Roger, but as the happy, confident kid he's becoming. She does know him, I said, and she knows you. The best parts of her live on in both of you. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the neighborhood. Children playing in backyards, dogs barking, the distant sound of a lawnmower. Normal, peaceful sounds that had become precious to us both. Dad? Harper's voice was soft, thoughtful. I want to do something to help other women who are going through what I went through. What did you have in mind? I don't know yet. Maybe volunteer with a domestic violence organization, maybe start a support group. I just know that I can't be the only one who's experienced this kind of manipulation. She wasn't. Morrison had connected us with several of Roger's previous victims, and we'd learned that Harper's experience was disturbingly common. Financial abuse, isolation, gaslighting, these were tools used by manipulators across the country to control and destroy the women they claimed to love. Whatever you decide to do, I said, I'll support you completely. I know you will. That's the difference between real family and the fake version Roger and Diane created. Real family doesn't try to control you or change you. Real family loves you enough to let you be yourself. 3 months later, Harper launched a small consulting business, helping other abuse survivors navigate the legal and financial challenges of leaving manipulative relationships. She worked with lawyers, therapists, and financial advisors to create comprehensive support plans for women who were ready to reclaim their lives. Her first client was Amanda Walsh, the woman Morrison had told us about, Roger's victim from years earlier. Amanda had been living in California, still struggling with the financial and emotional damage Roger had inflicted. Harper flew out to meet with her, sharing not just practical advice, but the hope that comes from seeing someone who has survived and thrived. It was like looking into a mirror, Harper told me after that first meeting. Not just seeing what Roger had done to her, but seeing how strong she actually was, underneath all the damage. The business grew slowly but steadily. Harper was careful to maintain her boundaries, to protect her own healing while helping others. She'd learned the hard way that giving too much of yourself could be dangerous, even when your intentions were good. Danny thrived in our multi-generational household. He started playing Little League baseball, joined the school chess club, and made friends with the neighborhood kids. Most importantly, he began to trust his own voice again, to speak up when he was happy or sad or confused instead of walking on eggshells the way he'd learned to do with Roger. One evening in late spring, almost a year after the confrontation, Danny came to me with a question that caught me off guard. "Grandpa, why did Roger try to hurt Mom?" I'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that eventually Danny would need to understand what had happened in his early childhood. Harper and I had decided to be honest with him, but age-appropriately so. Some people have problems inside themselves that make them want to control other people, I said carefully. Roger had those kinds of problems. It wasn't anything your mom did wrong. But why didn't he just get help for his problems? It was such an innocent question, asked with the clarity that only children possess. Sometimes people with those problems don't think they need help. They think everyone else is the problem. Danny nodded solemnly. I'm glad he's gone. Mom smiles more now. Me too, buddy. Me too. As I tucked Danny into bed that night, I reflected on how much our lives had changed. A year ago, Harper had been trapped in a relationship that was slowly destroying her, isolated from her family, convinced she was losing her mind. Danny had been a frightened little boy, walking on eggshells, learning that love came with conditions and requirements. Now our house was full of laughter, of genuine affection, of the kind of unconditional love that makes people feel safe enough to be themselves. Harper appeared in Danny's doorway as I finished the bedtime story. "Good night, sweetheart," she said, kissing her son's forehead. "Good night, Mom. Good night, Grandpa. I love you both." "We love you too," Harper and I said in unison. Later, as Harper and I cleaned up the kitchen, she paused in her dishwashing to look at me. You know what the best part of all this is? What's that? I'm not afraid anymore. For 7 years, I lived with this constant anxiety, this feeling that I was always doing something wrong, always disappointing someone. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to worry about what mood Roger will be in or what new way he'll find to make me feel small. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter. I get to just be. Be a mother, be a daughter, be myself. It's such a simple thing, but it feels revolutionary. You've always been yourself, I said. Roger just tried very hard to convince you otherwise. But I'm stronger now. Stronger than I was before I met him even, because now I know what I'm capable of surviving. I know that I can trust my own judgment, that I can fight for what matters. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my family sleeping peacefully in their rooms, I thought about the phone call that had started everything. Harper's whispered plea from the subway, her confession about the stolen car and the threats. I thought about how close we'd come to losing her completely, how Roger's plan might have succeeded if Harper hadn't found those recordings, if she hadn't had the courage to reach out for help. But mostly I thought about resilience, about the human capacity to heal and grow and reclaim joy after trauma. Harper hadn't just survived Roger's manipulation, she'd emerged from it stronger, wiser, more compassionate. She'd turned her pain into purpose, her experience into empathy for others who were suffering. The next morning, I found Harper in the kitchen early, making coffee and humming quietly to herself. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating her face as she moved around the familiar space. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning, Dad. Beautiful day, isn't it?" It was. It absolutely was. Harper poured me a cup of coffee and sat down at the table where we'd had so many conversations over the years. The table where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd planned her wedding, where we'd sit together working through the aftermath of her divorce. "I have some news," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Good news, I hope." "Very good news. I got a call yesterday from a women's shelter in Providence. They want me to develop a workshop series about recognizing and escaping financial abuse. It would mean traveling once a month, but Danny and I talked about it, and he's excited about the adventure." I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took my breath away. "Harper, that's wonderful. It feels like everything is coming full circle. All the pain, all the struggle, it's becoming something meaningful, something that can help other people." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for seeing who I really was, even when I couldn't see it myself. Thank you for letting me fight for you. Thank you for trusting me enough to ask for help." We sat together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, survivors and victors, planning for a future that was finally truly ours to create. The silent control was over. In its place was something much more powerful, the loud, joyful, unashamed sound of a family that had found its voice again. And we were never going to be quiet about our freedom again.